Very good to be here. Uh, I thought I would begin with a story I heard when I was growing up in Western North Carolina. I grew up with storytellers. My parents, my grandpa had a lot of stories to tell us by the fireplace or on the porch. Uh, One of my grandpa's favorite stories was about a couple who are getting married there in the mountains, and the husband, the groom, finds a rock out on the side of the mountains that's just perfect for a natural hearth. And he builds his cabin right over it, the chimney right over it. They move in on their wedding night and light a big fire in the fireplace, not knowing that a nest of rattlesnakes are wintering under that rock.
Ooh.
The warming of the rock makes the snakes feel that it's spring. So they come crawling out at night, and the wife wakens and hears the snakes crawling around. The husband gets up and is bitten by many snakes and dies. Isn't that a wonderful story to tell kids at bedtime? He would send us to bed terrified. But another story they told was set in Flat Rock. Some of you may know Flat Rock, North Carolina. It's a resort area. The rich people, the aristocrats of Charleston and Savannah and Atlanta built their mansions there so they could be cooler in the summertime and also get away from the yellow fever and the malaria of the low country. This is about 1830, antebellum America. They would take their carriages and wagons and drive from the low country all the way up into the Blue Ridge Mountains to spend their summer. Now, these were big mansions that's still there, by the way, mansions with white columns and big estates. There were lots of yards, big yards, ponds, pools, fish ponds, that sort of thing. Now, my relatives were there on farms around them, and they sold them produce and chickens, pork, and worked for them. One of my ancestors was a carpenter who built cabinets there in Flat Rock. But in the 1830s, the French consul in Charleston, a Count de Choiseul, built a house there and met a young girl. We'll call her Anne. Beautiful girl, about 16, who is still almost like a child in some ways. She still played with friends, with dolls, and played games. But the Count falls in love with her, and they are going to marry. The family is so pleased that this French nobleman is going to marry their daughter. And they plan this huge wedding there in Flat Rock with a small orchestra, champagne, dancing. The mountain people are so fascinated by all this ceremony. They gather around the yard and look on. And after the ceremony itself, the young bride and her friends play out in the yard. They play tag, and they eventually start playing hide and seek. It's getting late in the afternoon, and they hide behind the boxwoods and in the cellar of the house and among the outbuildings, which were probably slave shacks, actually, some of them. In the woods around there, they play game after game, and eventually this young woman who's just been married does not come. She's not found. So they go looking in the house, in the cellar, in the closets, out in the woods nearby, among the shrubbery, look down the well, and they can't find her anywhere. She has just disappeared on the day of her wedding. They don't know where to look for her anymore. They ask people on the highway, have you seen her? Drovers, people in wagons, nobody has seen her. This becomes a great mystery The Count, in disappointment, goes back to Charleston and returns to France. It's only many years later that a carpenter working in the attic opens a trunk and finds a skeleton wearing a wedding dress. She had hidden in the trunk. The trunk had closed and locked.
Oh,
Could not get out. I heard that story many times and various versions of it. Now, my story that I'm going to read to you is called The Wedding Party. And we're moving 100 years later. It's 1930s, the depth of the Great Depression. This big house is still there, but the people in Atlanta who own it haven't been up there because of the Depression for several years. There is a caretaker named Bowman Ward, and he hires the narrator of this story to do some repair work on that house. And they mention this story, very well known, the bride who disappeared on her wedding day. They talk about that a little bit. Now, the narrator is a Baptist minister who, of course, is not paid enough by his church to live on, so he works as a carpenter part-time, and he's been hired to repair this great mansion in the depths of the Depression. It was one of those old mansions in Flat Rock, maybe the oldest one, built by rich flatlanders in the last century. You know the kind of place with white columns and a third or fourth story and a cupola like the top layer of a wedding cake. There were porches all around and more windows and gables than you'd want to count. The problem with houses like that is they need so much upkeep. Even rich people don't want to pay for the painting and roofing. I reckon they were built back when wages were near nothing. Bowman Ward, the caretaker, was showing me what needed to be done. The owner, some mill owner from Atlanta, hadn't come up there since the stock market crash. I reckon they were built back when, the owner, several windows need caulking before you can paint, Bowman said, and the roof leaks in a dozen places. I'll need scaffolding to reach those dormers, I said. Can't you use a ladder? Can't reach them, I said. No need to tell Bowman I didn't have any insurance because of my bad back. I'd been hurt on a job down in Greenville and couldn't get insurance anymore. After the fall, they gave me a one-time settlement, which was soon spent, and they wouldn't hire me again. That's why I was taking whatever I could find at wages below scale. I was a minister of the gospel on Sundays and at the Full Gospel Holiness Church, but I couldn't get any insurance because of the back injury. Can't you rent scaffolding? Bowman said. Might be able to rig a platform out of 2x4s for the dormers, I said. We walked around the front of the house where the boxwoods lined the walks, and the porch was wider than most houses. Just looking at the porch made you think of ladies in low-cut dresses dancing to an orchestra, and men in high collars sipping from frosty glasses. My grandpa had told me how the rich people in Flat Rock lived in those days, with garden parties and banquets in tents. He worked as a carpenter at this very place. And he said the young women back then wore dresses so low you could see their bosoms. He said they chilled champagne with ice from the cellars and danced till it was morning. Why are the front windows still covered with shutters? I said to Bowman. Because the owners didn't come this year. Since the Depression hit, they haven't been back to Seven Oaks. I'd forgotten the place was called Seven Oaks. In the vast front lawn, there were several big oak trees and evergreens lined the driveway. It was a circular driveway made for carriages. This is the house where the girl disappeared, Bowman said. Disappeared on her wedding night, never seen again. I don't believe such a tale, I said. It's supposed to be true, Bowman said. They say the house is haunted. People like to tell stories, I said. The tale gets started and just keeps on growing. Wind swept uphill from the lake, tossing leaves along the walkway and flower beds. Water sparkled in the distant lake like brushed steel. It was some kind of French count that built this place, Bowman said. I think his name was de Choiseul, something like that. We walked along the driveway and climbed the front steps out of the sunlight. Our feet drummed on the wide porch, and my teeth chattered a little as Bowman unlocked the front door. Bowman's wife just up and run away about 5 years before. She and Bowman had always quarreled, and it was thought she had a lover. It was rumored Bowman was glad to get rid of her, but nobody ever mentioned the scandal around Bowman. How could a girl disappear with 100 wedding guests around her? I said. I'd heard the story several times since I was a boy. Let me show you which window needs caulking first, Bowman said. Then we'll look at the roof later. The great parlor inside had carpet and a gleaming hardwood floor, but the furniture was covered with sheets. It gave me a chill just to look at all those ghostly white cloth draped on sofas and chairs, bureaus and highboys. I saw something move and jumped, and then I realized it was us in a tall mirror. Where do you go to church now? I said. I wanted to think of something more cheerful. Bowman's family had always been Baptist, but I heard they had a fuss at Poplar Grove Church and had split off. We still go where he always went, Bowman said. You'll be mighty welcome at the Full Gospel Holiness, I said. Bowman led me to a high window at the end of the long parlor. There was a water stain on the wallpaper beside the window frame. This one needs caulking the worst, he said. Through the glass, I could see the tall hemlocks swaying and twisting outside. There was a whisper where air came through a crack around the window. It felt colder inside among the mirrors and chandeliers than it had outside. What was the girl doing when she disappeared? I said. She was in her wedding dress, Bowman said. She was only 16 the day she married the Frenchman. They had the ceremony at St. John in the Wilderness Church, and then there was a feast and dancing on the front porch. I reckon the celebration went on all day, and then about dark, the girl and some of her friends started to play a game of hide and seek. In her wedding dress? She was only 16, Bowman said. I've heard she still played with dolls and toys. We climbed the big winding staircase up to the second story. The stairs were as wide as a highway. At the top was a hallway running the length of the house. There's a window in the master bedroom in bad shape, Bowman said. It was so dark I'd have to bring a flashlight or lantern to see what I was doing on the inside. The second floor smelled like dust and old face powder and talcum powder. How long has it been since they lived here? I said. Like I said, they came up the summer before the stock market crashed. Doesn't seem like a friendly house, I said. Any two of the bedrooms are bigger than the house I grew up in or the house I still lived in with Mabel and her 4 children. People say it's still haunted. That's why the owners don't want to stay here, Bowen said. Oh, people like to talk that way, I said. The bedroom doors were all closed in the master bedroom. The furniture was covered. I saw a water stain on the wall that looked like tobacco juice. Said. There was a brass telescope pointed through the window and a globe the size of a washpot in the corner. There was a dead squirrel on the floor below the window, dead so long it was dried flat and its eyes looked like dogs of glue. Died of heat in the summertime, Bowman said, and pushed the fur with his foot. Where were they playing hide and seek? I said. Do you want to tell stories or start work? You're the one that started telling, I said. Bowman patted the water stain like he thought I might not have noticed it. They was hiding all over, he said. They hid behind boxwoods in the hedge. They hid in closets in the house and under the porch. I've heard they giggled and shrieked as they run out of the dark. I reckon boys and girls wrestle and put their hands on each other, as they will do in fun. It was a wedding party, but the bride and her friends flirted like 16-year-olds will. while the groom smoked his pipe and the older guest watched the young folks romp and holler from the porch and parlor. The Frenchman was much older. Oh, he was at least 20 years older than the girl. I looked out the window toward the lake. The glass was so old it seemed to ripple and stretch. There were crows in the oak trees. So when did she disappear? I said. It was long after dark, and many of the guests had called for their carriages and gone home. The groom suggested to his bride it was time to stop the game, but she only laughed at him and ran away. The boy, who was it, counted to 100 and hollered that he was coming to look. There were screams and laughing as the young folks ran into shadows, and everybody was found one by one, but they couldn't find the bride. First, everybody laughed, and then they started calling her name. Everybody went looking, even the Frenchman went looking. And she was hiding, I said. Nobody knows. They looked among the boxwoods and all the shrubbery. They lighted torches and looked in the woods and around the lake. They even looked in the well and among the barns and stables. And they searched the house. Of course, they looked in the house. They searched the cellar and all the rooms and closets. They looked in the attic and on all the porches. They even took a lantern and looked in the cupola. And they searched the road. They sent parties along the road as far north as the French Broad and south to the state line. They questioned drovers and travelers. Nobody had seen her. It's just a story, I said. You better get to work, Bowman said, if you plan to get anything done today. Bowman started to act like a boss man because he was caretaker for the rich people in Atlanta. I know how to earn my pay, I said. I learned a long time ago. You don't let somebody boss you around or low rate your work. Once they start running over you, they'll never stop. Reckon there's a lot of carpenters out of work, Bowman said. I do a day's work for a day's pay, I said. Don't you church pay you nothing? They give me what they can. These are hard times. And times will get worse before they're better, Bowman said. Before Bowman left to go to town for roof paint and a roll of tar paper, he told me to take a flashlight and climb up the attic. You'll see where the old roof is leaking, he said. And then he was gone. I got the ladders and started to caulk the windows. I guess I'd get that done before I looked in the attic. Caulking windows is almost as dull as painting. I cut the end off the nipple on the tube of caulking and squirted the white paste into the cracks around the windows on the first 2 stories. I filled every split in the old wood, knocked away loose putty around the panes. I kept thinking of a child playing children's games on her wedding night. Had she dreaded the wedding night and was putting it off with the children's games? Had she fallen in the lake and drowned? Had she been kidnapped by highway robbers? Had she run away with a younger boyfriend to the west? The old turnpike was now US Highway 25. Heard a police siren go on by the highway. There were pine trees at the end of the lawn, and I could see red lights flashing beyond them. When they held the torches over the well and looked in that night, could they see all the way to the bottom? It's just a story, I reminded myself. Think about how you're going to pay your bills. Think about what you're going to preach on Sunday. Think about poor Bowman, whose life left him. I'd finished the windows Bowman had shown me by lunchtime. The breeze under the trees was so cold, I shivered once I got out of the sun. It was cold in the big house, but at least it was out of wind. I ate my dinner in my Model T truck because it was warmer there. I ate biscuits and sipped coffee from the thermos. I looked at the dormer windows in the top of the house. They stood out like raised eyes on a frog. They would indeed be hard to reach. I'd have to build some kind of platform beneath them. But I could put off the dormers until the next day. Why not do what Bowman had said and check the water damage in the attic? The sun had gone in. It was getting colder, even in the Model T. I reached in the glove compartment for my flashlight. The batteries were weak, but maybe they'd give me enough light to see the underside of the roof. I hadn't been able to afford new batteries. When I entered the house, it felt as cold as an icebox. freezing air seemed to stumble down the stairs as I climbed. I didn't look at the furniture all covered with sheets, and I didn't look at the mirrors as I passed them. It was darker in the house than it had been that morning. I shivered as I climbed to the third story. Something rustled behind the door, but I figured it must be a mouse or maybe a bird that had come down the chimney. There were fireplaces in most of the rooms. The moment I said the stairs to the attic were in a closet at the end of the hall. I opened a door and somebody in white stood there facing me. But it was just a dummy or mannequin like dressmakers use to fit clothes on. My breath was short. You're acting silly, preacher boy, I said to myself. You've let that silly story get to you. When I found the stairs and started climbing, I felt my way in the dark. I didn't want to use the juice and the flashlight till I had to. The air in the stairwell smelled like old tobacco and something else, rat pee, sour rags. When I reached the attic door and opened it, I was relieved to see there was a little light from the dormer windows. They were small and only threw light close around them, but it was better than no natural light. I paused to get my eyes adjusted and looked away from the windows. There were boxes all around the attic, old chairs and benches. I looked into the dim corners and I looked at the chimney. Strings were stretched between the rafters and old leaves were tied on the strings. I walked between boxes to look closer. That's where the tobacco scent was coming from. Somebody had left tobacco up there to cure years ago and forgotten it. Something fluttered against my cheek and lips. Was it a moth? A cobweb? I wiped a hand across my face and slapped it away. You idiot, I said to myself. It's just an old attic. You're alone in the house. Nobody's going to hurt you. You're a minister of the gospel. Don't be silly. All I had to do was switch on the flashlight to look at the roof. Nobody was going to see me or do anything to me. The floorboards creaked as I walked on them. Something else fluttered in the darkness, probably a bat. Most old attics had bats in them. Keep yourself steady, Reverend, I said. I switched on the flashlight and pointed at the roof above. But the rafters and braces up there in the dark, and the board so blackened with age, the dark swallowed up the beam. The flashlight was so weak it threw a pitiful spot into the blackness. I strained my eyes to see water stains on the underside of the roof. It was hard to see much of anything without a stronger light. I have to get Bowman to bring a new flashlight or furnish new batteries if I was to make any kind of inspection of the roof. It came to me that any leaks would drip on the floor below. You could tell where all the worst leaks were from the stains on the floor. I turned the flashlight on the floor, and sure enough, among the old books and papers, the jars and cigar boxes, I saw circles and craters in the dust where the drips had splashed. Circles big as elephant tracks, where puddles had spread and dried up. There were little circles and runlets where one puddle had touched into another. There were so many splash tracks, it was hard to tell where the leaks were exactly. And I recalled how water from a leak will run down a rafter before it drips off, so the drips might not be exactly under the leaks. I'd still have to get a stronger flashlight to examine the roof. That's when I saw the shoe print in the dust. Holding the weak yellow beam closer, I could tell it was a man's shoe. Somebody had walked through the dust recently. My heart jumped in my throat. I swept the flashlight ahead, but couldn't see anything. Something brushed my cheek like a wing. I slapped it away and heard a flutter in the air toward the chimney. Calm yourself, preacher, I said. Bending closer, I saw the shoe prints were so fresh you could spot nail holes in the heels. I followed them around a chair and between boxes to the chimney and under the tobacco. Then I busted out laughing. They were my own tracks. They circled past the strings of tobacco and right back to where I first noticed them. You fool, I chuckled to myself. I laughed again to make myself feel better. On Sunday, I'd be standing at my pulpit describing this dusty, spidery attic in the house of the rich. I Shine the light on the floor again and saw my tracks had disturbed older tracks in the dust. There were dim tracks, like tracks in snow that had been covered by later snow, tracks so vague you could hardly see their outlines. I followed the old tracks toward the far end of the attic. They must have been made by Bowman or others bringing boxes up here, or looking for things, or by carpenters coming up to inspect the roof and braces. There were tracks that might have been made years ago, still showing through the dull coatings of dust. I shined the light around a box and saw an old trunk. There were no tracks in the dust around it. It was an old steamer trunk covered with leather, and the leather was mostly eaten away by
He froze.
curiosity. I pulled out the pipe stem and saw it was so old the clay had cracked. I lifted the lid
Robert,
to see what had been.
Robert, you froze up for like 10 seconds there.
Oh,
Can you return to where you just got to the trunk?
Yes.
okay.
Great suspense.
Sorry about that. I shined the light around a box and saw an old trunk. There were no tracks in the dust around it. It was an old steamer trunk covered with leather, and the leather was mostly eaten away by rats. Then I saw there were tracks going up to the trunk, but they were so dim you could hardly see them. The trunk was not locked, but a pipe stem had been stuck in the latch, holding it tight. With childish curiosity, I pulled out the pipe stem and saw it was so old the clay had cracked. I lifted the lid to see what had been left in the trunk. The flashlight was so dim that at first I couldn't see a thing. Holding the light closer, I found lace, like the lace of a wedding dress. And then I saw the yellow hair and
Oh.
the smoldering bosom of the fancy low-cut wedding dress.
Again, you froze up. Sorry.
Oh,
Right, go back to where you discover the lace.
holding the light closer, I found lace, like the lace of a wedding dress, and then I saw the yellow hair and a skull with the mouth opened in a scream, and I saw the finger bones holding a doll clutched to the smoldering bosom of the fancy low-cut wedding dress. At first, I thought it must be a trick Bowman was playing on me after telling me that story about the bride. But when I looked closer, I saw the bones were real, and the hair was real, and the bones didn't look 100 years old either, for I could see dried black stuff on the bones that must have been flesh. My hand shook so bad I could hardly close the lid. And I wondered what I would tell my congregation later about the moment I had opened that trunk and found Bowman's wife. End of story.
Ooh. Ooh. Wow.
Interesting.
Oh,
twist.
any questions or comments?
Wow.
Yeah, I thought I would put another twist on that ghost story. That's what we do. We take something that's been told before and we change it somehow. How I could tell you another story if you would like, or how long do you make these sessions?
They're open. I mean, it's open-ended. It's flexible. Does anybody have any response to that? I mean, I love the way it weaved in, you know, the looking back at the old story and then, oh, well, we got a job to do, and the sort of the present and the past and the way the footprints in the dust, you raise the tension and then you release the tension again. So Really skilled, interesting, good storytelling.
Yeah.
Really enjoyed it.
Well, let me tell another story quickly. Very different kind of story in some ways. The main character of this story is an archaeologist from the mountains of North Carolina who is teaching at a small college in the Piedmont section of North Carolina. And one day he picks up the paper and he reads a story that a skeleton has been found below Devil's Courthouse. If you know the Blue Ridge Parkway, you know there's a great cliff called Devil's Courthouse. That was the Cherokee name for it. A place haunted, the Cherokee would say. And below this great cliff, they have found a skeleton which they assume belongs to a Cherokee, and a great lump of gold beside it, the size of a tennis ball. And he thinks, my goodness, I've got to go see that, because he's an archaeologist who's worked on the Native Americans, the indigenous people, all of his life. And so that's very interesting that this is found. Nobody's seen it before. And of course, this lump of gold beside it is very interesting too. So he drives back to the mountains, and he's always thrilled to go back there and to see, you know, the very high, cool mountains. It's in the middle of summer. But he expects that because of the gold, thousands of people will be converging like a gold rush or something. Wherever gold is found, there will be people coming to find more gold. This happens everywhere gold is found. It happened in North Carolina in the 1820s, happened in Georgia in the 1820s, happened in California, of course, in 1848, 49. When he arrives at the parking lot on the Blue Ridge Parkway, there's almost nobody there. There are young people talking on their cell phones and walking up to the top of Devil's Courthouse. There's only one park ranger there in his SUV. So our archaeologist walks up to the park ranger and says, where is everybody? I expected there'd be a rush here, but there are only a few people, and they're not even looking for gold. They're talking on their cell phones and their devices, and some are walking up. And the park ranger says, yes, I'm as mystified as you, but people don't go out in the forest anymore. They go to the shopping mall, or they spend their time in front of their computer. The young people have no interest in going out into the forest. And then the ranger shows him, they're standing up high on the mountain down where the skeleton was found. And he says, by the way, a patient at the VA hospital, a psychiatric patient near Asheville, has escaped, and it's thought he is in these mountains. Let us know if you see him. So with great difficulty, our archaeologist walks down the mountain through the balsam trees, through a thicket. Takes him about an hour to get down to the area where the skeleton was found. When he gets there, he sees where the leaves have been disturbed, where they found the skeleton, and some people have, they of course took the gold. It's no longer there. The skeleton is gone also. So he thinks maybe if the gold was found here, there is a vein of gold up on the mountainside below this great cliff called Devil's Courthouse. The Indians named it that because they thought it was haunted by the devil, by evil spirits. Our archaeologist climbs further up and encounters a wild-looking man, beard and long hair, who warns him that there are panthers around. You better stay away. They're panthers, very dangerous. He had better not come here anymore. And this man is carrying a big 44 Magnum pistol also. Well, our archaeologist grew up in the mountains, and he knows that mountain people always tease tourists about the danger of bears and panthers, including black panthers. So he sort of laughs this off. He doesn't know who this man is. He thinks he might be the patient escaped from Otine, from the VA hospital. The man goes away. He disappears into the thickets. And the archaeologist goes up to the foot of the great cliff and finds a cave there. It's clearly a cave that's been used by many people, including outliers in the Civil War, probably, deserters, outlaws. But he doesn't have a flashlight, so he can't explore it. He becomes interested in this cave, and he thinks the gold may have come from somewhere in the cave. So he has to go back to his truck, his SUV, and stay overnight in Brevard in a motel. All through the night, he keeps thinking about this cave and about the wild-looking man he has seen in the woods, and wondering if it's the psychiatric patient. Is it a moonshiner? When he was a boy, he would encounter moonshiners in the woods who would warn him to stay away because there were panthers, bears, or something, so you wouldn't find they're still in the woods. So he thinks this might be a moonshiner and not the psychiatric patient. When he comes with a flashlight he has bought, the next day, the park ranger is still there, but he chooses not to tell the park ranger about this man he's seen, because he doesn't want them down there where the gold might be, around the cave. He climbs back down, explores that cave, finds all kinds of things left there, debris from the Civil War, even earlier perhaps, from the Indians who used it. Animals have used it. He doesn't find anything significant. He doesn't find any gold, but he walks out along the cliff, about the base of the cliff, maybe half a mile, maybe a little bit more. Sees under briars these rocks piled against the side, and he feels this warm air coming out around the rocks. And he knows there must be some sort of cave there, because caves breathe. They breathe out and in, depending on the season, depending on how hot the air is around it. And he's really curious about this. So he moves the rocks out of the way, and he does find the entrance to a cave there. It's been covered up, covered with vines as well as rocks. Turns on his flashlight, or one of his flashlights, crawls into the cave, and encounters a huge rattlesnake, which is buzzing with its head raised. He doesn't want to go any further because this rattlesnake looks dangerous, but he turns the flashlight on the snake, and eventually it quits rattling and crawls away into a crevice in the rock at the side of the cave. He turns the flashlight to the other side and sees, to his amazement, steps carved in the cliff going down. They're kind of rough, and he sees rusted tools lying on the steps going down. He knows he has to explore that. He also knows that 400 years before, the Spanish were in the mountains there, and they enslaved some of the Indians and forced them to work for them, digging for gold. The Spaniards were there looking for gold, of course. Very slowly, he goes down these steps, and this hot, dusty air is coming up out of the cave below. Works his way down very slowly. The air is so bad, he's afraid he might be smothered, so he's not so sure that he wants to go down further. And then he comes to a kind of landing, and he sees something white the size of a large softball, and realizes it's a skull. And he sees chains, rusted chains, and then he sees other skulls, and there are all these chains, and he assumes, these were Cherokees that the Spaniards enslaved and forced to dig for gold here. Sad story. But then he sees crucifixes among the chains, which the Spaniards would wear and the Cherokees would not. And he thinks, the Cherokees overcame their enslavers and put them in chains and left them here for 400 years in this cave. And he's amazed. He's an archaeologist. He's never heard of anything like this. And as he begins to climb out of that place, he wonders, what is his responsibility? Does he have to reveal this secret? Will the Cherokees be angry that it's been revealed? Is it his responsibility as a scientist to tell this story as a scholar? He can't decide. As he climbs back, almost out of breath because this air is so bad, when he gets to the top of the steps, there's the rattlesnake again. And he's about to smother this bad air coming out of the depths of the mountain. Well, he's got to do something. And he finally picks up this wad of leaves that have blown into this cave a long time ago, and very laboriously gets it lit, throws it at the snake. Again, the snake crawls away into the crevice. He crawls, almost smothering, out of the cave into the fresh air. So happy to be out in the fresh air, but also troubled. What is his responsibility? What should he do about this secret? Will the Cherokees be offended if he reveals it or not? He walks a little way down the mountain and he hears people talking. He goes to see what it is, and there's a state trooper and the park ranger shouting at this wild-looking man who's holding his pistol on them. They're trying to persuade him to give himself up. Apparently he is the patient from the psychiatric wing of the VA hospital. The man is in bad shape emotionally. He eventually does give them, they persuade him, they'll take him to McDonald's and buy him a hamburger. They'll give him a Coca-Cola. He's been starving up there. He gives them the gun and they hit him up the side of the head and knock him down before putting the cufflinks on him. Very sad scene. They take him away, and our archaeologist is still left in this quandary. What should he do for the sake of science, for history, for the Cherokees? And he realizes there is no easy answer to that. And I decided to end the story there. I wanted to set it near Devil's Courthouse because it's such a beautiful place, such an absolutely astonishing cliff. But I just could not tell that story of finding that the Cherokees had overwhelmed their enslavers and left them there. They suffered a great deal, by the way, when the Spanish arrived in the mountains looking for gold. Did you know that they're called the Appalachian Mountains because the Spaniards had enslaved the Appalachian Indians on the Gulf Coast and forced them to be their burden bearers up into the mountains? Oprah Winfrey asked me when I was on her show, how do you pronounce Appalachia, the Appalachian Indians? And I said, oh, it's just Appalachian because they're named after the Appalachian Indians. Story number 2.
That's great.
I have lots of other stories, but maybe we should stop there.
I have a question about the air. In the story, you talk about hot, suffocating air coming from the depths of a cave. The only caves I've been in, I was in caves in Mona Island, off the coast, off of Puerto Rico. And I don't remember, I think the air there must have been fed by ocean breezes and was much fresher than what you're describing. So is it usually the case that cave air is hot, dusty, not fresh?
No, but in some caves, I think it would be true. And it has to do with the season also. But what's in the cave, and if it's deep, it's going to be hot, right? The air is heated. What's the general temperature? I mean, you get down 100 feet. This is why you can have, a heat pump, because the heat is in the earth. So the deeper it is, but I don't think that's true of all caves by any means. And I wanted to give it that feeling of, coming from from rotten things to set up the shall we say, atmosphere.
Yeah, you get a sense of desperation that you're just the sense of gotta get out of that place, even if there's a rattlesnake in your way. So
yeah, he is suffocating. The air is so bad. It's probably natural gas in that air, which is
Ooh,
poison.
he's lucky he didn't blow up.
He is.
He didn't pass out.
Yeah.
I liked both stories. I liked the first one because you have this minister who's a carpenter who really, he's very good at his work. But it shows me that through just work, that sometimes problems are solved. You know, a person is able to think about a solution. So for that first story, that's what I like. That this minister carpenter was just meticulously doing his work, but then he was able to find a solution through his work. That's what I got out of it. The second story I liked the best because there was a twist of those skeletons not being the Indians or the Cherokee, but the Spaniards. So that was funny and
I lost you again. I don't know what's happening with the internet.
yeah, no, I think that's on Francine's end. She froze for me as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seemed like the first one had a real resolution, whereas the second one, you sort of left us to decide ourselves what we wanted to believe. So
Yeah, more realistic. I like stories that have problems that are insoluble, basically. Because he's being with science. What would the Cherokees, would they prefer this story be revealed or not? He doesn't know. He's worked with them, the indigenous people. He's spent his life as an archaeologist.
a dilemma.
Mhm.
Anybody else want to put in their 2 cents? Question, comment?
I became a storyteller when I realized that telling stories was easier than working on a farm. I grew up on a farm.
I really liked the amount of detail that you put into it. It's very, and it sounds like they're not pattern stories. They have a lot of realistic detail in them. And you seem to like twists too. Both stories have a twist in them. The bringing the having the two the wedding dress being pulled forward from 1830 to 1930. They're wonderful. The stories are great. They really are.
And I also like the fact I've been both those places traveling, but also that you started to drift into that North Carolina accent as you were reading. And I think that enhanced it to me because it felt like I was there.
Yeah.
And I
do that. I've been away for 50 years, but when I'm reading my fiction, it can come back.
Yeah, I like that.
Especially if the character, go ahead.
Yeah, I always like hearing work read by the author because that's so much more special than just reading the words on the page. Your inflections and then the accent. Really nice.
Yeah, voice is very important in my writing. I can write a story once I hear the voice of the narrator.
Nice, very nice.
The narrator seems to be an intimate part of these stories.
Yeah, I was able to write the novel Gap Creek after I'd been trying for years to start that story, and I could never get it going until I was a visiting writer at Davidson College and was living for a semester in the South again, hearing those voices. And when I got the first sentence, I knew I had the novel. know about
Neat.
the death of my senior because I was there.
Neat.
And that, yeah, I wrote that first draft in about 3 months and brought it back to Ithaca and revised it some.
Hmm.
But I could hardly wait every morning to see what Julie would tell me again.
Neat.
Wonderful, thank you.
What, tell us a little bit about the Oprah connection. Was that like a total shock? Did she just call you up or?
Oh, it was a total shock. It was January of 2000. After all the hoopla, you know, about going into the new millennium and stuff. And Gap Creek was published in the fall of 1999, and it got wonderful reviews, got a rave review in the New York Times, and it had sold out its first printing, which was, I think, you know, only about 10,000, maybe even a little less than that. So we
Wow.
were pleased. It seemed like a success. And about the 10th of January 2000, I got this phone call on a snowy afternoon, and the woman said, she didn't introduce herself. She said, "It's true what they say on the back of your book. It's the work of a master." Well, that's the way you talk to authors, right? I said, "Well, thank you." I said, "Thank you." And then she said, "No, I mean it. You know, it's such great detail, and you know, I just couldn't put it down. But I have a question for you. What does my senior really die of in that first chapter?" So I said, he chokes to death on worms that he vomits up. It's a terrible scene. And she said, "Well, I have a book club." She still hadn't introduced herself. She said, "I have a book club I would like you to visit." And I decided, well, this is somebody in Spartanburg or Greenville, you know, I'd met on book tour, and I would be diplomatic. I said, "Well, I'll be happy to visit your book club when I'm back in the area." And she said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Ithaca, New York." And she said, "Oh, you're up north." "I'm up north too. I'm in Chicago." And I recognized Oprah Winfrey's voice at that point. And
Oh,
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
so she called you herself. Like that seems crazy too.
she never introduces herself. She gives you a call, and she's so famous, she expects people to recognize her voice, which many people
Wow.
do. So I hung up the phone and said to my wife, "You won't believe who that was on the phone. That was Oprah Winfrey."
And she said,
my-
no
My
way.
wife said, "Oh, somebody's playing a trick on you." I thought, "Oh, there's somebody at the bar downtown Ithaca having a good laugh." And the phone rang again. And it was the producer of the Oprah show. And she started making reservations to fly to Chicago and to fly down to South Carolina to do an interview on Gap Creek. It's a real place.
wow.
I began to believe it, and hung up the phone, and my wife said, "Well, how many copies do you think that will sell?" And well, you know, I'm a poet. I said, "Well, you know, maybe 20,000 copies," which is a lot of copies for most people, actually. And the next morning I had a call from my publisher who said, "We have to have 600,000 copies in bookstores 1 week from today."
Whoa.
Whoa.
And of course, they went through more printings. Yeah, it ended up selling about 2 million copies. And
Holy mackerel.
so I can tell you, if Oprah calls you,
Say yes. Huh?
you're in real luck.
Wow.
No, it really took off. It was, and people say, "Did you like Oprah?" And I say, "Yeah, I liked her." And she was very nice. And
What is not to like?
Yeah.
Wow,
no,
that is
being
amazing.
on the show is very easy. I'm used to, you know, giving lectures and things, but I didn't have to do anything. I just listened to other people praising my novel.
Wow.
Pure pleasure.
Neat.
Well, then, I can see why. You have a wonderful style. It's very folksy, and it just has a real authentic ring.
Here, I've been teaching a long time. Oprah said that if they have a writer who's been teaching, they know that he or she will talk well on the show. But if you call up a writer who's never taught, they sometimes have trouble presenting themselves, talking about their work. But it's something you learn on book tour. If you're on, say, the noon news, if you're lucky, you get on television because that reaches more people. And if there's something breaking, they will send you off without talking. But if you're lucky, they put you up besides this gorgeous woman who's the anchor, and they wire you up, and then you get your 2 minutes or 3. So you got to think of something to say, and 2 minutes will make people want to buy your book. And this gorgeous anchor, turns to you and says, we just love your book and are so happy. Well, she's never read your book. She has a sheet from the publicist. So you have 2 minutes to say something that would interest people
To
out
buy
there.
your book.
And you get better at it. Actually, you get pretty glib once you've done this, a few dozen times, which is not good for a writer to get glib, but you have to know how to pitch the book.
Yes, you sound anything but
Surprised
good.
by an anchor who had or a beautiful woman who had read the book? I mean, had some of them read it?
Probably very few. Now, Oprah had read
Really?
it. She
Yeah.
really had. She knew the book quite well. No, this new local news anchor, doesn't have much time to read. They might have read some of it, but she's doing her job. She's doing what she's supposed to do, to talk about how good your writing is and introduce you so you can do your bit for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Huh.
So
And
you've
that's
worked
if you're
your-
lucky. 1 minute of TV time is worth 10 of radio. So you've really got to learn something about television. I was on tour with a famous biographer who wrote a biography of Reagan. This is way back, very controversial. And he said his publisher sent him to TV school because they knew it'd be very controversial and people would be asking lots of hostile questions. And I said, well, tell me what they taught you. I want to know, how you act on TV. And he said, well, it's actually very simple. Of course, you always stay cool, never lose your temper on television. And if somebody asks you a particularly tough question, never lean toward the screen, lean back to show how cool you are. Then turn the question aside. You say, well, that reminds me of, or, when I was writing the book, you never answer directly the hostile question. And if you watch really good politicians, they do the same thing. They know this. You rarely answer a hostile question directly.
And I just Googled Robert's name and Oprah. I haven't found the clip on YouTube, but there are a bunch of it looks like a bunch of clips of him talking about several books on YouTube, so you could easily go check them out. And
If he leans back.
if he leans back. And Robert, you've worked your way up from Oprah, and now you've done the GIAC senior group. So
Yeah.
Well, that's progress, huh?
we appreciate you showing up, and it's nice to see everybody this morning. But perhaps we'll let everybody move on with their day, and it's great to have you. Thank you so much, and maybe sometime in the future, given your stories, maybe Halloween would be a good time to have you back.
Absolutely. No, your questions are very good. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So much.
Yeah,
We'll do it again.
Excellent.
That'd be great.
thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome.
That was good. Yeah.
Thank you, Zach.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you next. Bye. Yeah.